Hi, and welcome to AXSchat. This week we're talking about access and inclusion matters in Egypt, and we're delighted to have with us Abeer Shakweer. Abeer, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to work in this field?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for interviewing me and trying to know what we are doing here in Egypt for helping the disabled. Actually, I work as an advisor to the Minister of Communications and Information Technology since 2012. Before that, I was working in the field of innovation and managing science and technology. Somehow it also touches upon disability. But since 2012, I'm very much focusing on the use of technologies to empower persons with disabilities in Egypt.
Fantastic, and it's great that that the ministry is working in this space. So, what kind of things are you bringing forward? Do you have legislation already in place, or are you working towards pulling together legislation and best practice?
Well, actually, if we talk about legislations in general, not focusing on ICT,
Sure.
the Egyptian Constitution mentions of the rights of persons with disabilities. And as you may know, Egypt is a signatory of the CRPD on 2007. And now we are working as the Egyptian government to have a law on disability. And it is now being discussed at the Egyptian Parliament. But if you are talking about the ICT sector, we are doing actually a lot of effort to develop ICT accessibility policies. We already worked with the G3 ICT. Actually, Deborah Rowe, she helped us a lot to develop the ICT accessibility in education policy. And we developed this in 2014. Now we are working with the International Telecommunication Union to develop the ICT accessibility for the whole ICT sector. And we already developed the first draft of this policy.
Excellent. So, obviously ICT is a huge area, but it's potentially hugely enabling also, because access to technology means that we have access to products and services that people may not have been able to use before. So I think it's really such an important part of the inclusive society to be able to enable this, and that legislation is always going to play a part. But also, I think the government can also lead in the way that they procure products and services. So is your focus around the sort of totality of inclusion, or is there also a focus on what the government can do when they are providing? So is the focus public sector or both public and private?
Now, actually, we are not only focusing on the public sector, because we want to play the government role as developing the enabling environment for other parties like the private sector and the civil society to also engage in empowering PwDs. And that's why in most of our projects we are engaging the private sector and the civil society, and we have especially in the area of employing PwDs, we are working in public-private partnership projects, because without the private sector we cannot really rely on the government only to employ PwDs, because we don't want this employment thing to be a part of the government responsibility, or we don't want this to be part of the employment quota indicated by the Egyptian Constitution. But we want the employment of PwDs to be based on their capacities and their skills, and we wanted the real inclusion of PwDs in all the sectors of the country.
Abeer, I was fortunate to meet you a few years ago, and I would like to say we are speaking to Dr. Abeer Shakweer. I'm very proud of so much that you've accomplished. And when I go around the world talking about these things, I often use Egypt as a best practice. And I find that I really believe that we're going to see innovation coming from countries like Egypt, because Egypt has walked a very difficult path over the last few years, and yet you've had some of the best employment outcomes of including people with disabilities in the world. Also, your ministry has provided technology, training, guidance to people with disabilities, parents with disabilities. I know y'all been very good about bringing in the voice of people with disabilities, nothing about us without us. It's just amazing. And I know that as you noted, we did some white papers together that are now out on g3ict.org. And you've actually won several awards for the work that you're doing in Egypt. The first year that I came, I've been to your lovely, lovely country many times, and I'm always amazed at the construction. It seems like Cairo is thriving with construction everywhere. So I think sometimes media misrepresents who Egypt is. Egypt seems to be very thriving. But why? Why did you make this such a priority for the country? And I know you've been leading and advising the different governments, and your agency has actually been advising the other agencies. And I just am amazed at some of the efforts and successes you've had. So can you tell us a little bit more about all the moving parts in Egypt?
Yes, sure. Well, actually, why we are focusing on PwDs, you know that we went through two revolutions which called for social justice, and PwDs have been marginalized for a long period of time. And since they are almost 15 million Egyptians with disabilities, it is now the time that we really focus on how to engage them. And the main obstacle actually is to change the mindset about PwDs, their productivity, their skills, and their abilities. And as ICT are I call them the magic tools to support the empowerment of PwDs. We cannot really empower PwDs or achieve an inclusive society without the help of technology. So when we started back in 2012, we thought of the different fields that we need to tap on, or we need to handle to really empower PwDs. So we started with a single project. We had like parallel projects together, but we focused on education, how to make the schools accessible. And with your help, we developed the ICT accessibility and education policy, and we then developed a number of projects to put this policy into implementation. So given that we have almost 700 special education schools in Egypt, we now glad to say that we accessibilized around 480 schools. They are equipped with the different assistive technologies, which supported the Arabic language, because this is another challenge, because the assistive technologies which support the Arabic language are not that widespread. So we equipped them with text-to-speech software, sign language dictionaries, braille printers, and even assistive technologies to help students with cognitive disabilities to improve their skills and abilities. We also trained the teachers on the use of assistive technologies. We trained so far more than 5,500 teachers in 1 year, and our target is to train 30,000 teachers by the year 2019. This is in the area of education. We also have an accessible portal for the ministry. This is where we provide PwDs with the required information, and this is where they apply for our grants. We have different grants, like as we spoke, the training for employment grant, and this is one of the projects that I'm really proud that we managed to mobilize the whole community to work together to support the employment of PwDs, given the negative mindset that we had in Egypt. And I say had because now it is being really changed. I would like to a little bit speak about this project, because it's I think it was a kind of big obstacle for us, but now it's a successful one. And we, at the beginning, we thought that the private sector will not be willing to employ PwDs. And we thought of an innovative approach to engage the civil society to partially support the salaries of PwDs for over the first year of employment. So now the ministry is identifying the vacancies. We train PwDs on the required skills, and the NGO is partially support the salaries, and the private sector is kind of support the PwDs to get engaged in the work environment and provide them with on-the-job training. So it's a kind of really collaborative project. Now we managed to hire like 70% of the graduates of the project, and we are continuing. So hopefully that we transform it into a national initiative. We also have an innovation competition to support innovators and developers to develop assistive technologies which support the Arabic language, as I said before. And now we have more than 35 new technologies in the market, and we are using them to accessibilize the schools. So it's like a kind of there is a feedback or a loop between the different projects. So those are mainly the many projects that we are working on.
Yeah, and I just want to repeat a number for our listeners. She said 70. They had a 70% employment outcome. They started off, they weren't going to ask for any, they were not expecting employment, and they were shocked and really excited to see that the employers stepped up and hired 70% of the people that they trained, which is, we're not seeing those kind of numbers in the United States. So it is very exciting watching Egypt lead on so many of these areas. And I want to make one more point, then turn it over to my colleagues. But I remember when we first spoke, that you talked about corporate social responsibility and how important that is in Egypt, to the government and the NGOs and the corporations. And you're also leading those efforts, Abeer. And I'm continue to be amazed at what you're accomplishing in Egypt, despite a lot of social things being thrown at you that have been very difficult. But it's very exciting to see the progress that's happening because of your work and because of the ministry. But I was wondering if you could just talk just a little bit about the corporate social responsibility, and then I will pass the microphone over to Antonio.
Okay. Well, especially at the ICT sector, there are multinationals which dedicate a good amount of money to corporate social responsibility or to the social responsibility projects. And we thought that when we spoke to different companies and also the NGOs working at the sector, we found out that there are repetitive projects and there is no coordination between the companies, and that's why we thought that this was not the optimum or the best use or utilization of the resources, whether human resources or financial resources. So we worked with we formed a committee for social responsibility where the companies are represented and the civil society, of course, the government. And now we developed one strategy for the ICT sector on social responsibility. And we agreed together that we will not force anybody to do any project, but we want to collaborate. And the way we work is that when there is a project that fits with the priorities of the government, we classify or divide the projects into different components, and we bring together all the stakeholders and we ask them who can do which component. And actually, we don't get the money into the ministry, but we ask the responsible party to go and implement this component, and the ministry is implementing its part and also coordinating the efforts so that we make sure that the project at the end is accomplished. And through this technique, we actually managed to do a number of projects, like developing 34 inclusive community centers. And here I have to say that this is the first time that we include PwDs in mainstream projects. So we shifted from like implementing projects for persons with disabilities, which is still important, but we shifted this approach to include them in mainstream projects. We also worked into 20 orphanages, and we equipping now 200 social or community schools, which are the poor schools in remote areas.
Amazing. Antonio?
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Abeer, for all those insights. Something that we have discussed previously with other guests on AXSchat that we have the pleasure of interviewing is sometimes the challenges for business to hire people with disabilities. So how are you able to build that trust between all the different stakeholders to make that a success?
Well, this is a very good question because this was a real challenge. First of all, we thought that we have to release the burden of, or the economic burden from the shoulders of the companies. And that's why we thought of the partial support of the salaries of PwDs. And the partial support is that we provide 100% of the salaries over the first 6 months of the first year. Then 50% has to be paid by the company for the next 3 months, and 75% is also to be paid by the company, so that the company is paying for the PwD because he is productive, not because it's a charity. So that's why we show the company that practically that PwDs are productive. This was the first really and the most effective approach we followed. Actually, I have to say that 20% of the PwDs who are now employed at the ICT sector were hired and paid from day one by their companies. So the PwDs, they proved themselves. We cannot claim that it is our success, it is their success. They proved themselves, they were really impressive. And I think now we extended this project to a second phase, and it became part of a presidential initiative on the empowerment of PwDs using ICT because of the PwDs, not because of anybody else.
Okay, thank you. So we're talking about people and who are able to have a job and carry on with their lives, and business engaging and having an active participation at that level. For looking to the other side, from the perspective of an Egyptian consumer with disabilities, can you describe us the life of those users? How can they use technology to consume, to buy goods, to be more part of the world, of the networked world? What type of instruments do they have to use ICT technology to engage with government and to be part of the consumer market?
Okay. As I said at the beginning, there is a lack of assistive technologies which support the Arabic language. So the percentage of PwDs who are using assistive technologies which support other languages are not that big. And this was one of the obstacles here. And that's why we launched this innovation competition to develop assistive technologies using the Arabic language. Now I have to say that some of those technologies are helping PwDs, like we have a mobile application which reads the Egyptian currency for persons with visual disabilities. They are now using it to purchase, and they really, although it's a simple application, but it like turned their lives 180 degrees. Another thing that we are using is the unified Egyptian Sign Language Digital Dictionary. There was no approved sign language in Egypt, and this was a problem for PwDs themselves and for communicating with the rest of the community. Now we developed a unified language, and we developed a digital dictionary. It's now distributed to all the schools of persons with hearing disabilities. And now we are working under the umbrella of the presidential initiative to see how we can accessibilize using the technologies the different governmental entities. I think that we will not be able to accessibilize all the governmental entities, but our target is to accessibilize 300 entities in 3 years. And I think this will encourage or the rest of the community to get engaged with PwDs and to have a more inclusive society. So a real problem was the lack of assistive technologies which support the Arabic language.
Okay, that's really interesting, and obviously this is a problem that has been across the Arabic-speaking world, because we're familiar with the work of the MADA Center, and they've also been investing quite intensively in trying to develop Arabic language assistive tech. One thing I'm curious about is whether the strategy is to develop your own standalone assistive technologies, or find ways of supporting the integration of Arabic languages into mainstream assistive technologies. Because one of the things that worries me is that it's difficult to pay for to raise the money for this investment more than once. So as technology moves on, we need the assistive technology to keep pace with the developments in mainstream technology. So how do you balance that need for first off developing something that's not there, and then B, making sure that it stays current as technology runs ahead?
Well, I have to say that this is a new industry in Egypt, but actually over the last 3 years it went fine, because we started with only 4 technologies, and now we are this year we are funding another new 15 technologies. With the ministry, we have an entity which is affiliated to the ministry. It's called Industrial Information Technology Development Agency, which is responsible for supporting or creating and developing and enhancing the ICT industry in Egypt. So in collaboration with this entity, we actually can support companies to develop the assistive technologies. And I have to say that this is a huge market, so we are not asking companies to develop something that has no market, but on the contrary, it has a huge market not only in Egypt but also in the Arab world. And this is could be a niche for Egypt, and this is how we market this new industry. And actually, we are working with the ITU to develop a regional ICT center for persons with disabilities. It will be based here in Cairo. We are about to sign the project document, and part of this part of the activities of this center is to launch a regional innovation competition, like the Egyptian one, the local one, or the national one. We are going to launch one. We have to launch one regional innovation competition, and I think this will engage or make the industry aware that there is a real market and there is a kind of collaboration opportunities in different Arab worlds, and this will make the community, will mobilize the community to help to work in this area.
Excellent. So I'm absolutely convinced there's a market, and I know there's a market, and it's definitely one that's underdeveloped. So I think that people that get in early have a real chance of making a really decent business venture out of serving the needs of people with disabilities. What I was really interested in is, how do you make that interoperable with some of the really big technologies that affect everyone's lives, the sort of the tools like the Facebooks, the Googles, and the sort of the day-to-day office tools that are international in scope already. How do you work with these big companies already, or is that something that's an aspiration at the moment?
Well, for the time being, we are not working with them because they don't really have like development centers in Egypt.
Okay.
Many development centers are outside the country. But I think once once we are now working with other companies, but not those multinationals one, to open their factories here in Egypt. And I think that once we manage to do this, the ICT accessibility policy, which we are developing with the ITU, has to integrate with those new development in Egypt. So that's why we are developing this policy, so that we can have an umbrella for anybody who is working in Egypt to consider the accessibility features and universal designs in their products.
Okay, thank you. I think Deborah's got one further question.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Abeer, obviously, I'm a big fan of the work that you are leading in Egypt, but I also think what it proves, what we're seeing happening in Egypt in a very short amount of time, y'all have had substantial progress. I understand there's still a lot of work to do, but I think the one thing that I can see, the reason why you've had the successes that you've had, despite everything happening in the country, and look who's talking, I'm from the United States, and anyway, God bless America, but we have a lot of problems, but is that you brought all of the stakeholders together. You brought the individuals with disabilities, you brought the employers, you brought the universities, the schools, the governments, all of the stakeholders together, and you gave everybody a voice. There's always people that think, oh, my voice isn't big enough, but I think that's partially the reason why we're seeing such great successes under your leadership and many other people's leaderships in Egypt. And I was wondering if you agree with that.
Well, thank you for calling our achievements success. That's very encouraging. Well, actually, you are right, but also there is a very important point, which is the political will. We have the government is now very much committed to the issues related to persons with disabilities, not only in the sector of the ICT, but on the level of the president himself. And this actually trickles down to other decision makers. I worked with different ministers. I never ever asked for any support unless I got it. I think that I'm lucky to have this kind of support, and it's like we can negotiate anything at the ministry, but not the projects of persons with disabilities. This is real. I'm not like saying this because I have to say this, but this is the real situation. Even sometimes there are some requests from persons with disabilities which seems to be very difficult to be applied, but at the end of the day we apply them because, as I said, we can discuss anything but not the requests of persons with disabilities.
Neil?
Fantastic. So outside of the sphere of IT, what other projects are going on? You mentioned the work that you've got going on in education in terms of training up teachers and providing access for the children, and obviously you've got the work schemes that you're sponsoring. What about I've just come back from Brazil from the Paralympics, where part of the legacy has been infrastructure projects, where they've started to make their transport and their streets and so on much more accessible. Is there work ongoing in that area too?
Yes, there is work ongoing on the area of infrastructure, not only by the government but also by NGOs. And I here remembered a very nice application which is called Move On, and it's about marking which entities in Egypt are accessible, whether they are restaurants, shops, or governmental entities, whatever. And for an entity to be registered on this website or this application, it has to be checked by against certain measures. So I can say that we achieved a lot in this area, but it's moving, and the awareness is now much like better than before, and the engagement of different entities will make things move faster.
Great. So, and one of the things that I've seen is that these kind of efforts snowball. So it takes a while to gain momentum, but once you have gathered that momentum, more and more people see the benefits, and it's like with curb cuts. Everybody uses them. Women in prams, delivery drivers. Accessibility benefits so many more people, and once people start to understand that, I think the job of advocating for doing this becomes a lot easier. So, have you seen more people coming into the fold and joining you in promoting these kind of projects since you started? Because it must have been fairly lonely to begin with.
Yes. Some people, they got very interested, but they don't have something real to do, but they got very interested and they got impressed by the project. And this is also a good thing, because the word of mouth is important and raising awareness is important. But yes, we engaged many people also in doing real projects, as I said, the companies and the NGOs, and now some people, they even if they cannot collaborate for some reason or another with the ministry, they can go and do their own project, which is also again very good. And I think this is one of the roles of the government, is to mobilize the whole community to work. They don't have to work with us, but they have to work to serve the cause.
I know that I maybe end up changing somehow the tone of the conversation a little bit, but over time we also had some guests who work in the media, work in cinema, and in many different aspects of that industry. Can you tell us at the moment what is the level of participation of people with disabilities in the media and in theater and cinema? But sometimes the fact that presence exists is actually a way to strengthen and improve the way how the society looks at people.
Yes, true. When we have different programs which are have the sign language translation, like news, like some TV or shows in different channels. We have other programs which are run by persons with disabilities, and we have YouTube channels that run by PwDs. So it started to move. It's not up to the standards, or it's not, this is what we are looking for, but at least now we have dedicated programs for PwDs, both in the TV and in the radio. But of course, there is a lot that needs to be done. For the cinema, as you mentioned, for the cinema and the theater, this is another area where I cannot really see any so far any activities. Maybe there is something that's being prepared, but so far there is no accessibility in cinemas and theaters. This could also be one of the role of ICT, because what we'd like to do is that we want to improve the unified, for example, the unified digital dictionary, and include more words, because now it has 7,000 words. We want to improve it to include 15,000 words, and use it as an interpreter in movies or on TVs. And this is something that we are encouraging the ICT community to do. And I think maybe we can reach something in not in the near future, maybe in like month or 1 year at the most.
Exciting.
So thank you, Abeer. We've reached the end of our half hour for the interview. We're delighted that you're going to be joining us tomorrow on Twitter. I think we've got a rich vein of stuff to be tweeting about. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Abeer Shakweer.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we can do tomorrow.
Thank you.